security scholar. So for me, it's more a question. When I think about security, it's like who is talking and who and what for and for whom, there is a security threat. And for me, this is like obvious question, how we can think actually now any kind of criticism towards the state, towards institutional anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma racism, without being defined as a threat. Practically, it becomes impossible to criticize the state without really falling into this category that you are endangering the status quo, right? When I'm just thinking about why this foundation started to share this discourse in which Roma become a threat. For me, it was like a provocative thing, and I would agree with Dan. It's like a very bold move, but I think like it's kind of mannerism, I would say, of this like a new Roma subjectivity that I see that it's building up in a sense that we can have now to get human rights, which became completely irrelevant in some way. Either you have to be a worker, which will contribute to the economy. So this is kind of like Roma are good workers. Now we are young, plentiful, flexible, adaptable, whatever you wish. And to play on xenophobia. So there is this kind of like we are domestic, so we are accustomed to this culture, whatever. And we are good workers. So you have to fit into this kind of like racial capitalism, or you are basically good, how to say, soldier, Roma as soldier. So this kind of subjectivity of Roma soldier, we see this with Ukraine. And this kind of like we are very loyal subjects who will give their life, and you owe us our human rights because of this. So this is kind of like it's like a mantra that you have to deserve your human rights. So this image, you can see it in the culture, like how Roma representation is changing, and how these people who are doing basically Roma governance without any accountability, I would say, how they're building up this image. Okay, so you're young, professional, entrepreneurial, you're going to be like boosting your, whatever, it's like self-employment with microcredits and whatever, all these kind of failed projects all around the world are now kind of like sexy, so to say, in this new attempt of building this new subjectivity. So I see it as a pattern. I don't see it as a proper, like people sit and think like, oh, how is this going to have like what kind of effects? But it's just like what we think that it will be catchy and acceptable to the European, whatever, Brussels, whatever, I don't know. So in that sense, so there is this kind of idea that now Roma become a security threat. And now I'm trying to understand this logic. So there is some logic in it. I would say I would give them some credit in that because if you violate human rights of people, obviously they're not going to trust in institutions. They're not going to trust in the democratic process. So you will have this kind of trying to find easy solutions for your, poverty or whatever. And people did that. That's how right-wing movements developed, okay? Because there was some, problem and people didn't have enough resources. And then somebody offered them, like, you'll have more living space, you'll have more resources, we will be richer. And that works in some context, I would say. But what I think that it's the problem with our Roma elite, I would call them Roma elite, I don't know how to call them, who accept, embrace this idea, which is basically Gajo-centered, because it doesn't take in consideration the position of Roma in Europe, and the racialization and criminalization and all this that people already mentioned. So this idea of Roma as a threat exists in Europe much longer, since Roma came to Europe, basically, because you are the other. You're culturally different, you're racially different, you become economic threat, you're poor, and criminalization of Roma and securitization, it was already there. Violation of Roma rights in that sense doesn't bring something extraordinary. The moment when the state makes some kind of oppressive move, you have to be silent. And this is a security threat for now in Serbia, when we have this kind of horrible corruption, or all kinds of criminality, especially in Western Balkan countries where you have this transition which was criminalized and and all kinds of, cronism, clientelism, whatever. In this setting, you basically have a silenced elite, which cannot move, which cannot do anything, which cannot guide, even give any kind of commentary, any kind of guidance to Roma people at this point, because they would lose all kinds of, connections, they would lose influence, whatever. So I think what happened during this decade is institutionalization, mainstreaming, and all this kind of attempts to, I don't know, to try to have some effect. And I can understand from their position, it's basically they're blackmailed, because if any kind of, they have to play like a low risk strategies. But unfortunately, from a perspective of Roma people, you're basically left on your own. So that's how I feel at this point, especially in Serbia, when we have like riots and everything, and no one word from Roma. While there is also police brutality, police constantly coming to Roma settlements and raiding them for no good reason, and this happened especially now in June in Novi Sad, and nobody said a word. And yeah, I mean. At the moments, the most critical moments, the biggest security threat is now our elite, which is I don't know, blackmailed by the state, and that's it. We are in some kind of, and they are elite which is captured. I mean, they got all the resources and influence, and there is no alternative, basically. And that's now the problem. And they're taking the political position of the radical revolutionary resistance, which is completely ridiculous. I think that having this discussion is one important step in just starting the conversation, not just about security, but I mean about alternative perspective, because as Dan says, like I'm usually on social media and I'm being vocal, not getting so much likes, to be honest. People are afraid, and even when they like something, it's just like without comments, without any kind of community building, without anything. So I think one of the problems is that people are actually being afraid to talk within their own community. How it happened, why it happened, I don't want to get into that, but our Roma elite is representing us in a certain way. And they really don't have any accountability. And this is something that, this is why I guess this is why this kind of security talk can happen, because there is no accountability to anybody basically but themselves. They do have expertise, but it's not the perspective of Roma community, because now I'm thinking when you talked about this, there is this gaze, which is like a threat for whom? It is a threat for strategy of EU, and they have their own ideas about external and internal security. And Roma fit into this internal security threat. And that's how they're portrayed, yeah? That because they don't have the human rights, they are a security threat within. but also they are prone to foreign influences. So they are, threat from, external sources. So they both fit into internal and external security. But that's from the perspective of EU, which is equal to Europe. Unfortunately, it's not equal, but this is how it is presented. So we are lacking this, how to say, Roma gaze on security. So for us, what would be internal threat and what would be external threat? And I was just thinking when you were talking, for external threat for Roma definitely is war, possible war, and in that sense, there are states on which we can rely on. We cannot rely on their protection. So that's one of the things. An internal threat would be the state itself and its own securitization. So that would be like my idea about external and internal threats for Roma in this European context. And obviously, there is a need to talk about different levels of intervention. Well, first, definitely there is this kind of like consensus of what's happening, and to delineate these two kind of perspectives, right? That, what is good for EU doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for Roma people. And that's kind of like what Roma elite unquestionably accepts. And I agree with Dan. I think that there is this acceptance because there is like a negotiation ground, so that you can actually, gain something from already set, ground. But that's the problem, because they are accepting all kind of assumptions that already exist. They're not questioning it, and from the perspective of Roma community, then that's the problem, because there is a need for somebody to question these kind of assumptions. So definitely, there is, and then there are different levels of operation that we can talk about, definitely, about this preparation for war, awareness about this closeness of danger. I don't know, but then there is this kind of I don't really see this kind of difference between communities and like Roma elite, so to say, because I consider myself a Roma elite member. And I have a problem when we speak in these terms, because, I would say that all of us belong to a Roma elite. And when I speak about Roma community during COVID, for example, Roma organizations in Serbia didn't do much. They didn't do anything, basically. And Roma communities in slums, in mahalas, they organize themselves. They fucking organize themselves, and only after they started doing this, Roma NGOs jumped in and took over the discourse, took over the communication channels, whatever. But it was very visible that communities are actually capable of doing things by themselves. So I wouldn't underestimate in that sense, like ground level. I don't know. And I don't think that it's like that to speak in these elite terms, that they're difficult to how to say, mobilize or whatever. The problem, how I see it, is that it is a problem to mobilize people the way you want them to be mobilized. Now I'm just realizing that the biggest security threat definitely is our Roma elite for us. I mean, it's kind of like, unfortunately, it seems like that.